Joining us now, we have Andrew Wall. He is one of the Liberal members for Brindabella in the ACT Legislative Assembly. Thanks very much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. I'm just going to start with a pretty simple question to start things off. Can you tell me how you came into politics? How did this all start?
Look, I've grown up in Canberra, went to school here, lived here most of my life, and I'd been running my family's business in the construction industry.
You went to school in Marist College, right?
Yep, so I went to school at Marist in Pearce, predominantly lived in Waniassa in Tuggeranong, down in the valley, and it's always been home, particularly the south side. And as I went through school, politics was never an interest. It was something I never aspired to being a politician.
Okay.
But as I went through, I became a carpenter and then worked in my family's construction business, took on the role of running it, and started to realise that there was a better way of doing things, particularly the way the government interrelated with small businesses in the construction industry, but then also in other areas, in retail, in IT. And I thought, well, there's a better way of doing it. So I thought the only way to change something is to get involved.
Yep.
So I looked around at a number of political parties and thought, look, Liberal falls much more with my philosophy and view of the world. So I joined the party, and the intention was to talk to some of the elected representatives.
Is this something that you would suggest other people, like myself, who are quite young, to get involved with the community?
Look, I think if you like the community you live in and you want to play a bigger role in the way it's shaped, politics is a great way to get involved, but so is joining the local Rotary, the local, like one of the local community organisations of charities, Vinnie's Communities at Work down in Tuggeranong and Greenway, the food bank down at the Lanyon Shops. There's simple ways that you can make a big difference in the community. It doesn't necessarily mean running for office and standing up in an election, but certainly if that's something that you feel that is what you need to do to achieve the things you want to do, then absolutely look around, be it Liberal, Labor, Green, Independent. Find what party suits what your philosophy, what your view of the world is the closest, and go for it.
Okay.
So I think we should probably move on to policy-related issues now. So before we do head to territory-related issues specifically, we just want to ask you about what your opinion of the federal government's performance over the summer. So today we, of course, saw some Western Australian Liberal MPs calling for a spill of the national leadership. We've seen what some commentators are calling disastrous polling for the coalition less than 2 years into its term in office. Do you still believe, looking on as a territory counterpart, that the federal government holds a mandate from the electorate and still holds a tenable policy position?
Look, I think the federal government was elected under Tony Abbott on three main promises. It was to fix the budget deficit, to stop the boats, and to get rid of the carbon tax. Now, the boats have stopped, the carbon tax is gone. What they're trying to do is fix the deficit. The policies, to many people, have been fairly unpopular, and I think that's where they run into problems. They've failed to take the community with them on why they're making these hard decisions. Do they have a mandate to continue to finish that job? Absolutely they do. But the issue is have they still got the confidence of the Australian community? And sadly, in Tony's case, we'll find out next week, by the sounds of it, whether he still has the trust and faith of his party room.
Does he have the trust and faith and party of the Canberra of the Canberra Liberal Party?
Look, the Canberra Liberals have we're not lockstep with the federal government. Obviously, the job cuts that have happened here in Canberra have been nasty, and we've said so. We've stood up time and time again. It's something that the Canberra Liberals have got a proud tradition of doing. When there's a policy of the federal Liberal government that doesn't work well for Canberra, we stand up, we say so. So the job cuts that have hit the ACT the Commonwealth Public Service in the ACT is something we've been opposed to. Sadly, the Labor government locally at the ACT level didn't do that under the former Labor government. They denied it, ignored the fact that it was happening, and I think that's one of the big defining issues between the Liberal and the Labor Party locally. We're happy to stand up to our federal counterparts. And
do you think Tony Abbott should continue from next Tuesday?
Look, that's not a question for me. Obviously, I haven't got a vote in the federal party room, but that's up for the federal colleagues.
Okay, so we're going to move on to the next question. Now, this one is about one of your areas, actually. Now, I recently read a statistic which said that 27.4% of Australians with a disability are living below the poverty line currently. And I just wanted to know, as the Shadow Minister for Disability Services in the ACT, I wanted to know what your plan to tackle this is.
Well, one of the big changes that's happened nationally, and the ACT is a trial site for, is the National Disability Insurance Scheme. Now, that's going to go some of the way to addressing the issue. That's going to help with some of the care, the support, the buying of wheelchairs or aids, walking frames, walking sticks, hearing aids, that people with a disability do have. But the big issue lies with what employment opportunities exist. life on a disability pension is not a very fulfilling life. So the focus needs to be on what job opportunities can we create. The ACT government currently has a disability employment strategy, but sadly they're failing to meet their own targets in creating jobs for people that do have a disability. And I think if government can't lead by example, what kind of a message is that sending to the business sector locally? Okay,
just getting back to the youth again, is there anything that we can do, like sign a petition? Is there any way that we can help these 27.4% of people who are living below the poverty line?
Look, I think that there's plenty that can be done, be it from a young person or an older person, particularly if you're from a business perspective, if you are a small business or a startup business, someone with a disability has still got a great skill set that they can offer. Just recently, there's a business that started in Canberra called Enabled Employment. And the whole philosophy is that they marry up businesses or companies, not just in Canberra and Australia, but across the globe, with people that need a specific skill set, and the only people that they have on their books for recruitment are people with a disability. I think that supporting a business like that is a great way to try and promote employment for people that do have a disability. From a local level, if you see a job vacancy or you've got a friend that's has got a disability and they are looking for work, sometimes going around and trying to educate someone, an employer, that it doesn't necessarily mean that they need to change everything about their business or everything that they do to accommodate someone with a disability. Sometimes it's only very small changes that need to occur. It is very easy, but I think really the big issue is if government can't lead by example and show that people with a disability can make a valuable contribution, it's hard to get the private sector to follow.
So there you go. Yeah, what do you think then we've talked about how Labour is failing to meet its own targets in office. What do you think has caused them to fail to meet their own targets?
The big change that occurred was there was a change of Chief Minister. It was a policy that was announced under the Stanhope government, and it seems that it's easily target to be met if the commitment's there. But I think with the departure of John Stanhope, there was a departure of that commitment. There was recently an inquiry in the Assembly into Indigenous employment. Much the same issues appeared as consistent with the disability employment. Obviously not on the Indigenous side of things, it wasn't culturally appropriate recruitment methods. Same for people within a disability. Sometimes the selection criteria are structured for an able-bodied person, but if someone has got a disability, say a hearing impairment or a sight impairment, for them to address the same selection criteria is going to be a disadvantage.
Okay, just talking about, because you're also the Shadow Minister for Indigenous Affairs, right?
Yes.
Well, I was also reading a stat a little while ago about how Indigenous crime rates are much higher than we would like. And I was wondering if you have any way that you propose to tackle this, or something that we as a community can do to stem the tide.
Yeah, look, largely the issues with the Indigenous community aren't because of race.
No.
They're because of poverty.
Yeah.
They just happen to be overrepresented in that lower socioeconomic area. So education hasn't generationally been something that has been encouraged. So for young Indigenous kids going through school now, they haven't got a positive role model in some instances to say, hey, you went through school and you did really well. It's been a case of school wasn't important, you didn't necessarily get a job, wagging was more important, and then you couldn't get a job later, you found yourself on the dole or on welfare, and then from there often a life of crime. So often the statistics show that for a young Indigenous person that does go to jail, someone in their family has gone before them. It seems to be a reoccurring cycle.
So your plan to break this cycle is through education?
Look, I think education plays a very large part. Positive role models is
so
I think the key focus, and there's some great organisations locally. Men's Link is one of them that operates across town, where they take these kids that are at risk, that are likely to head down the wrong path, find themselves either in the courts, in drugs, doing some pretty nasty things. They put a positive role model in their life, show them that there is another way. And I think one of the great efforts of Men's Link is that it's normally someone that's independent. It's not the parent. It's not one of your parents. It's not one of your grandparents. It's not a teacher at school that's always telling you do your homework, turn up. It's someone completely independent, and they can offer a really, really good perspective on what the alternatives in life can be. But at the end of the day, it's up to the individual to say, I want something more. And as soon as you can get that light bulb to go on and have that moment of, I want to change what I'm doing, that's when you're starting to make a difference.
I just want to draw you back to a comment you made earlier. You were talking about how in not only Indigenous areas, but the other issue we were discussing before on disability was something that changed when the Chief Minister from Stanhope to Gallagher occurred. Something obviously that happened over the summer was the most recent change in Chief Minister from Gallagher to Bard. From the opposition's perspective, has anything about the government changed? Is it much the same? Has it become worse, become better? What's your perspective on the change of leadership?
It's still very early days, but I think over the summer period we saw that there's already been a few issues with Andrew Barr as Chief Minister. Most notably was that the traffic congestion we had down in the Lanyon Valley over Christmas, that caused a lot of difficulty and distress for Lanyon residents. And secondly, I'd say was the change to the amount of money you can put into a poker machine. Now,
but is that short-term pain for long-term gain? Because that was a traffic block in order to fix a problem which is going to make it easier for residents later on.
The traffic congestion that affected Lanyon, obviously it was only for a short-term period, but it was the attitude that was taken when that decision was made. I couldn't think of another area in the territory where a main entrance or exit road to a large suburban area would be simply closed off with little communication to residents, and the attitude being, not many people are going to work at this time of year. I think that's vastly wrong. Canberrans do turn up to work from the first week of January, and I think that was demonstrated by the congestion that we had. Taking 2 hours to get to work was simply distressing for some people. And the bigger concern was, what if I have an emergency? What if I need an ambulance? What if there's a fire? What if we need to get out of here quickly?
It's lucky that it's all finished.
And thankfully, touch wood, nothing did happen. But they were the concerns that weren't addressed before the road was shut, and I think that's where the concern came. Largely, it's communication, similar to what we talked about earlier with the federal government. If you can't communicate the message of what you're doing and why you're doing it, it's hard to have the confidence of the community.
Now, you've been pretty outspoken about the solar farms near Uriara. Is that the same kind of thing, where the government just hasn't talked to the residents about what they want and how it's too close? Because you talked about the fire danger. Yeah,
look, the solar farm at Uriara has a number of issues on a number of fronts. First and foremost, a solar farm isn't a nice greenfield type, it doesn't fit in with a rural scenery.
It's no coal mine, though.
The solar isn't necessarily the issue here. It's the type of development that's going across the road from a suburb. Uriara isn't just a couple of houses on rural, large acreage properties. It's ultimately a suburb of 100 houses fairly close together. And the proposal is to build the solar farm directly across the road on the northern side of the village. Now, all the homes were designed with really good energy efficiency. Most of them have got solar on their own roofs. Yes. All their views are to where they're proposing to build this solar farm.
Okay, so would you be okay with, say, with Gay Brotman's plan, to move it back 500 metres, as that way it won't be a fire risk and it'll be further away from the residents?
That's not uniquely Gay's position. That's something that the residents have put forward. It's something that I've advocated for quite extensively, was simply switch the site. Let's find an alternate place where we can still have this investment in the ACT, but not have it on someone's doorstep.
But do you agree with the 500 metres back?
Look, ultimately it'd be further than 500 metres, but the residents of Uriara have got a fairly open mind. They're fairly realistic in what their expectations are, and 500 metres was what they thought would be a fair compromise. Still on the same block of land, not so far that it changed the scope of what was going to be built. And the tree cover would provide some visual screening. But still be far enough away from the village to prevent a bushfire hazard. The Uriara village predominantly got wiped out in the 2003 bushfires. It's been rebuilt and was expanded.
But it's got a 300-metre abatement zone.
It does, yep. So one of the conditions of living out there is the residents have to maintain a 300-metre fire buffer that's free from any trees. It's just grass that has to be mown regularly. And all they're asking is that same buffer be put on the opposite side of the village before the tree buffer zone's planted.
Right. So moving on to another thing now. On the 9th of January, I believe, you sent out a tweet saying that the ACT Labour Party continued to treat Tuggeranong residents as second-class citizens. We were just wondering what it was you meant by that.
Look, time and time again, we've seen investment in the ACT going to other parts of Canberra, be it Gungahlin, Belconnen, Woden and the city centre. Tuggeranong seems to have been left behind. Tuggeranong was built through the 80s into the 90s. A lot of investment came down here then, and we acknowledge that, and it was what has built this great valley. But as soon as that work's been finished, the investment's left the Tuggeranong area, and the maintenance and the upkeep hasn't been up to scratch. That's certainly one aspect. As I said before, I couldn't imagine any other part of Canberra where they'd simply shut a road off like that and not expect there to be an issue. This week I've been fielding numerous emails, phone calls, and letters into my office about the smell coming from the tip. Now, they continue to leave rubbish uncovered up at Mugger Lane, and time again that smell wafts down onto Tuggeranong. We're forced to deal with it. You have a look around the Tuggeranong.
So if you could see one thing changed about Tuggeranong, would that be the tip and covering it up, making sure it's...
Look, I think the biggest thing that people always raise with me on a day-to-day basis, be it at a shopping centre or coming into my office, is just the way that the local area is presented. The parks, being suitable for kids to play on, the lawns being mown, the rubbish being picked up. They're the basic, council-type services that people expect. The roads being suitable to drive on, no potholes, line markings being done. It really is the traditional, roads, rates and rubbish type issues that I think are the main things that people expect to be done well and done affordably. We pay some of the highest rates to live in this city, and that causes a problem for young people as well that one day hope to go into home ownership. It is expensive to own a home in Canberra.
Yes.
And what people do expect then in the return is that things are done properly, but time and time again, particularly in Tuggeranong, we see that is not the case.
So, an interesting paradigm, I suppose, about politics in the ACT is that at a federal level, both the seats, Canberra and Fraser, are very safe Labour seats. Yet at territory elections, results tend to vary a bit. The Liberals tend to do a bit better at territory elections than they do at federal elections. What do you think causes Canberrans to be more likely to back the Liberals at an ACT election than they tend to be at a federal election?
Look, I think the local issues is what really separates, the success of the Liberal Party at a local level compared to the federal level. We do, as a core, want to focus on those local issues, as we said before. The suburban streets, the parklands. We favour a smaller government. We want efficiencies. We want a lower cost of living. We want to make it more affordable and more attractive to be in Canberra, to live, to raise a family, to go into business. The Labor Party, I think, has had a bit of an alternate philosophy. They see that if you have an investment property, you're wealthy, you should be paying more tax. And that is in contrast to what we see across the border in New South Wales. And Canberra's a pretty small place. We need to be competitive. It needs to be attractive to come and live here, to either go to school here, start a business here or work here. And if the balance goes too far one way, I think people feel it's time for a correction. I think 2012, Tuggeranong clearly sent the message that it was time for a change. But sadly, the way the election rolled out, it didn't happen across the city. The nature of a hung parliament is that it comes down to an individual rather than the electorate that chooses who the government's going to be.
And so I suppose all those things that you sort of talked about, the want for jobs, local services, setting up businesses, those sort of things tend to be quite similar, broadly similar to the messages that the federal Liberal Party tends to put across to the electorate at federal elections. Why do you think that the federal Liberal Party has been less successful then in the ACT?
Well, just going back to the 2013 election when Tony Abbott came into power, the big negative for Canberra was a policy of making an efficiency of the public service, which meant jobs, and that scares a lot of people locally. We've got about 60% of the ACT population's either employed directly in the public service or in a business that supports the Commonwealth government. So when there's any change to that structure, I think people become fairly cautious. And I think that's what we often see in the federal Liberal vote in the seats of Canberra or Fraser.
Okay, so I have two questions which I want to ask. One of them has something to do with you, and the other one is completely... we had an interview with an organisation a little earlier, and now I'm a little bit passionate on this subject. So I'm going to start with the one that has something to do with you first. Can you just walk us through a typical day in your office, if that's a thing?
Well, I think that, there's no such thing as a typical day in politics. Look, a normal day would consist of... I guess first thing, probably about 6 o'clock in the morning, checking the media for the day, finding out what the stories, what the issues might be. And then from there, often meetings with constituents down in the electorate. So I might go to their house or meet them somewhere where there's an issue that they want to have addressed. Once we get into the office, often meeting with the staff, making sure that they're on track, things are moving well. Spend a fair amount of time either doing shopping centre visits, so constituents can come down, meet me there, and raise an issue that they want to see fixed, be it something small like the street light in their street doesn't work, through to I'm trying to get my kid into the local school and I'm having difficulty, I'm looking for a house, my business is having some difficulty, is there some guidance you can give me? We do. That is probably the biggest part, be it through shopping centre stalls, door knocking. Small business is one of my portfolio responsibilities. So I do also spend a fair bit of time going door to door to businesses, having a chat to their owners and just introducing myself largely, who I am, what I'm about, and learning about what their business is, what's working for them, what are some of the challenges that they've got, what they'd love to see changed, just to make things a little bit easier. As I said, there's no such thing as a typical day, but that's one of the great joys of this job is every day you're out and about, you meet different people who have got different stories, and we live in a great city with some sensational people. I guess something that I can put out to some of the listeners is ways that they think I might be able to engage better. Often people will say, politicians, we only see them at election times. But I think it's becoming, we've got more and more platforms on which we can communicate. Radio is one of them. TV and print, the traditional medias, but social media as well has changed so much. Email, internet, Facebook, Twitter, instant ways of communicating with each other, and young people are often some of the harder demographics to hone in on, and have that conversation about what they love and what they'd like to see fixed in the city that they live in. And I'm always happy to hear from people and engage in that dialogue.
Yeah. Okay, so are you ready for the question which has absolutely nothing to do with you, but I'm very passionate about?
Ready for it.
Okay, so I did a speech a little while ago about organ donation, and I was wondering whether you think it should be, because currently it's an opt-in system, which means that you have to sign up in order to give your organs, and I think that it should be an opt-out system, which would take use of inertia. So I was just wondering what you think about organ donation, whether you agree with it, and I was also wondering if you think it should be an opt-out system to take use of all those people who are sitting on the fence.
I'm a big believer of organ donation.
Yep.
I am an organ donor.
Good.
And they're no good. My organs are no good to me once I'm dead.
Yeah.
And I think if it can change someone's quality of life for the better, by all means, they can have anything that will make that easier. Look, there are some complexities about an opt-out system.
Yeah.
But I think it's a debate that we really need to have. I think as some people have got religious reasons and whatnot that wouldn't be appropriate.
But then they could opt out.
But they have that freedom to opt out. And certainly I think even the system as it stands at the moment, if you register as an organ donor and you tell your family that that's what you want, they still at that crucial moment, should you lose your life, need to still give an authority to say yes.
Yeah.
And I think that often takes away the last wishes of the individual.
Yeah.
And that probably as a first step is something that needs to be fixed. But then from there, I think a broader discussion about an opt-out system is a conversation well worth having.
Andrew Wall, he's the one of the 3 Liberal MLAs for the seat of Brindabella in the ACT Legislative Assembly. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon.
Awesome having you on.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for answering all my questions.